It's worth it to read the book just for this one page, maybe.
I feel like it would do really, really well as like a desk calendar.
Please
Say what you
use that
feel.
accent for the rest of the show.
I do declare. What is your divine source telling you?
It's telling me let's get into the book.
All right.
The origin of how we picked this book, I think you were reading it and I told you that, oh, I read it a long time ago and I thought it was very vague. I think
Yeah.
I had a relatively negative reaction to it.
Yeah.
But now that I've read it again, I really like it.
All right. The book is called The Creative Act, A Way of Being by Rick Rubin.
Yes,
Continue.
the famous music producer person.
Infamous.
But it is actually written, I think like that's not super clear unless you dig into it, by Neil Strauss, by the way, who wrote The
Oh, dang.
Game and like other
He wrote
books
what?
that were-
What did he write?
The Game. You know the book about how to pick up women?
Are you serious?
Yes.
I didn't catch this at all.
Yeah, like it is a ghost written book. So I think that's one thing that people need to know is that like, creativity requires collaboration, which is one of the chapters in the book. And that like, Neil Strauss is a good writer. And he also has since renounced
Dang
his
it.
game ways, by the way.
He did? That's good.
Yes. And now he's a family man. So
But how am I going to pick up strange women without that book?
you wear a peacock feather.
I will get a peacock feather and I will put it in my fedora.
Do we go through our pros and cons list really quickly of what we like and don't like?
All right, so we're riffing. I think we do opening statements.
Oh.
We go, this is what I think. This is what I think. It doesn't need to be big.
Truly
you
a
don't need
riff.
to be
A riff
a
begins
simple
with
southern
opening
lawyer.
statements.
What?
Riffs begin with opening statements. I
Yeah.
feel like it's such a jarring clash of like freestyle rap and like high school debate.
You don't need to prepare. You just need to speak extemporaneously. Like I was saying, you don't need to be a simple southern lawyer and make a big old complicated mess of things. You just
Please
say what you
use that
feel.
accent for the rest of the show.
I do declare I will not. The Savannah molasses accent is very hard to keep up for a long period of time. I say we both say what we think. Chat can say what they think if they feel like it. And then we kind of go into a back and forth and then roll from there. Was that your opening statement?
No, I haven't even started. The Creative Act is a really good IYKYK style of book. It makes a lot of sense if you already do the things that is like recommended here and you're like reading it to be like, yes, I do these things. But if you're looking for instructional on how to be creative, it is a little bit vague and there are better books out there.
Yeah. It was a bad checklist.
Thus ends my statement.
Okay.
End with amen. Like, how do I end a statement?
Amen. Succinct, powerful. I think I'll remember it for the rest of my days. All right, so I wanted to hate this book, and then I wanted to love it, and I ended up not doing either. Rick Rubin is pretty controversial in that some people think he's the second coming of creative Jesus. Other people think he's like just a dude that like failed upwards and hasn't really done anything for people. I've never been in the room with the dude, so I can't have an informed opinion about it, but I do know a bunch of different people that I respect have different opinions about Rick Rubin, which is interesting. And I think the book is kind of a good mirror for Rick Rubin being the mirror for creatives, right? Because if you don't have opinions about creative stuff and you read this book, you're going to come away with zero additional opinions about creative stuff, basically. It's kind of like the creative book equivalent of Twilight, where every girl can see themselves in Bella because like it's like vague enough, some would say bland enough that you can like fit yourself in that character spot. But I actually think it's kind of effective. And to his credit,
Twilight is famous.
Twilight has been a very successful book series, and so I'm not hating. I'm a big Sparkle and Vampire fan. It's pretty funny. What I like about the start of the book, maybe it's Rick, maybe it's Neil, but he's like, nothing in this book is true. It's stuff that I've noticed. Don't listen to anything that doesn't resonate with you. Very on brand for the mirror thing, but also pretty good advice for creative stuff. The crappy thing, or the great thing, depending on how you look at it, about creative things is not only is everything not going to work for you, it's also not going to work for you at any specific point in time. So like your process that really works for you today might not work for you a month from now, and you're just gonna have to figure it out and like do something different. And so having this big survey of a bunch of different creative things, some of them pretty woo-woo spiritual that like I did not vibe with, and some of them kind of practical, and then some of them truly only Rick Rubin can talk about type things. One specific chapter is, I think it's called Apocrypha, where it's like he's just reflecting on the stories he hears about how certain albums or whatever were made, and how him being in some of those rooms, he's like, no, the creator, like the artist was just a person. And the story that leads up to this mythical album or whatever is a myth. And the day-to-day boringness of it, like sometimes like facts are true, but the overall mythical nature of the creation is not really true, which I think is very useful for somebody who is not successful, aka us, like to remember. Because like you want to look at somebody and be like, oh, they're a demigod, and no, they're just people. And that for me was really grounding. So ultimately, I found a lot of things that I liked about this book. I found a lot of things that I didn't jive with, and that is great for me.
I really liked how he gave some like practical advice to some extent, or like some observations that I
Like
didn't
what?
expect from this book. Like it's okay to have a job. Like he says that explicitly in one of the chapters. Like you do not have to make art your full-time job. Like that is, sometimes it's better to have like a stable, like something, or another, and just have the
Yeah.
time to play.
I mean, he
And
goes
he also
further, right? He
acknowledges,
says like for some people, that's
yeah,
like a better way to make things.
right. And I feel like a lot of these like kind of books are like, you gotta throw it all in, and at least he acknowledges the ranges. And like he also says you have to make art for yourself,
Yeah.
which I think is super important and very easy to lose track of, as you know.
Incredibly easy.
And he acknowledges that artists have big feelings. So he talks about that a lot, right? Where he's like, that's why people are on drugs like all the time, because like that's why the music is so good, because they have all the feelings, and then it
Well,
feels really bad, and then like it's easier to, or like very understandably go towards like chemical means. So I feel like in all of that, I already feel like he's like therapizing a lot of artists and like encouraging acceptance.
to be fair, he also says that the drugs don't make the art better. Like he explicitly says he's seen it, that kind of like addiction destroy a lot more pieces of art than actually help create. So he's not advocating for artists to be addicted to things.
Yeah, exactly. So Cool Beans asked for some good quotes. So I'll start
Yeah.
with the beginning quote. The object isn't to make art, it's to be in that wonderful state which makes art inevitable.
When was the last time you were in that state?
I feel it more and more, actually. I know, despite how I behave. To me, I feel like for everyone that I've met, like the art is within everyone already, and it's about uninhibition rather than seeking an external source. So although we talked about like divine inspiration and mundane inspiration, a lot of it is to like redirect what's already within based on one's experience.
Okay. Wait, so what does that mean for you? Actually, I haven't asked this. What do you consider your creative output? Like obviously this show and
Oh, that's funny. My question for you was, do you consider yourself an artist?
so I try to use the word creator selfishly because I have like a startup really related to creating. I also think of myself a little bit closer to the creator side of it, specifically of a chapter that he has in here about experimenters versus finishers. Do you remember that chapter? This is one of the few like claims he makes in here, but he's like more or less artists are there's like two types. There are experimentalists where they're continually making a new thing. They're really good at finding seeds of ideas that they like and enjoy, and then they'll play with it up to a point, and then it'll go on the shelf, but it won't, like it'll be 40, 50, 70% done, and then they'll move on. Whereas another category of like artists or creators are finishers that are really, really good at taking the good core idea and bringing it to its like finished state. Obviously that glosses over a lot of nuance with like how people work, but it's very useful for me who considers themselves like pretty squarely in the experimentalist category of
Oh,
like
okay, okay. I was gonna see like how does Cameron perceive himself? It better be the experimentalist.
100% experimentalist. He talks about this, and then he talks about like he like sits on the idea of finishing work for a little while. And this was the most helpful part of the book for me, was he gives permission to find seeds, and he explicitly talks about how like seeds of ideas might not need to germinate today. And so a thing that you have and then you squirrel away in a little list somewhere or a file like I do, you might come back 6 months, a year later, and it might be the time for that thing. And it kind of rationalizes or validates stuff that I was already doing. So that's why I kind of like it, because it's confirmation bias. But I also like to believe that I'm not just coming up with pure chaff and only publish something like once a month or once every 2 months. It's like, no, all of these might actually turn into something really valuable one day once I dial in my finisher kind of workflow. And so, but in the next chapter or whatever, he talks about these seeds also need to be countered with there's an energy when you just create something, like he calls it like inspiration or whatever. That energy might make the piece uniquely different if you make an end-to-end prototype of it or MVP, or maybe finish it in that initial session. And
I
I've
feel
really
like you're
found
really drawn to that based on the way I observe you work.
it's because I've been burned so many times of the like, oh, I made good progress on this thing. Let me like go to something else for a little while. And then I try to come back and the magic just isn't there. And so,
But doesn't that contradict with the other advice of like you shouldn't rely on your emotions to make something that is literally on a checklist at the end?
yes. And so what he's talking about is take advantage of it when it's there. Don't rely on that solely for how you do things.
Yeah,
And so it's like,
fair.
it is a little bit contradictory, and that's okay because he has this big upfront caveat about like, don't listen to the stuff that doesn't resonate with you right now. It's not fully satisfying because it's not this like prophet coming down and saying this is how you make a beautiful thing. But it's also a lot better than somebody telling you how to make a beautiful thing and it just not freaking working for you, you know?
So this relates to another idea that he brings up that I've seen in this other book called Big Magic by Elizabeth Gilbert, which is the idea that ideas have their own entities or beings, and if you don't catch an idea as it's going through you, it actually goes to someone else.
I'm glad you brought that up. I buy that 1 bajillion%.
Oh wow, this is the most woo-woo I've caught you.
Oh, it's not woo-woo. All right, but continue, and then I will.
Okay, I feel like yes, there is a secular, mundane explanation for it, which is independent simultaneous discovery. When the world is ready, then like things will pop up, and you gotta catch it or you lose it.
Every culture has wheels. Every culture has dumplings. Calculus was invented in 2 different places at once. Like I'm fully bought into like society is discovering a lot of these things. But a lot of people don't like that viewpoint because it is a blow to the armor of great man theory of everything, which is super popular right now.
More so than before, you think?
I think so. I kind of like break it into passive big man assumptions and active great man beliefs. In the past, the king was the king because the king is the king. You know what I mean? And so like everyone's like, yeah, it's the king, of course. Today, you have people reading mountains of, I mean, they're not reading, they're watching videos and shorts. People are consuming mountains of media to convince themselves how great particular people are. And as a result, they are as much, maybe more so, inculcated with this like great man theory of being the only way that society advances. And I think that's really, it's honestly incredibly dangerous. Not what we're talking about, but incredibly dangerous.
So this book goes through a whole bunch of really great, like, ideas to break out of any blocks. It's almost like Brian Eno's The Oblique Strategies card game. In terms of like practically uninhibiting, he has a few tips. So before, when I was telling you about the book, I was like, he gives no tips. I'm like, oh, that's not true. So some of the tips are like beating on the pillow for 5 minutes to express your anger, then journaling. Or like, those kinds of things. I'm like, okay, like that's a good practice. But I feel like there's a whole category of other books where there's a lot more practice of like, how do you get to the state of uninhibition, and like, The Artist's Way by Julia Cameron, that sort of book I think is much better. My friend Kevin McGillivray, who painted these paintings,
Oh, cool.
Yeah, I'll drop the link in Discord too. Like he has a whole bunch of like writing on creativity as it relates to coding that I'm like, okay, that's practical, right? Like how
Yeah.
do you tie these like lofty philosophies to the practicality of refactoring your code?
The engineer has practical tips. Surprise, surprise.
Exactly. Exactly.
There's also a good page in here, 139, if you have the book, and it's thoughts and habits not conducive to the work. It's not a page on like what to do about it. It's like a list of kind of warning signs of like, hey, these are things that you might be doing that are not helpful. Some are obvious, like believing you're not good enough, obviously not helpful for doing the work. But going through, there's a little bit. Honestly, I kind of felt sniped by this a little bit.
I know, right? Me too. I was like,
Yeah.
oh, there are practical lists.
Like having goals so ambitious that you can't begin, thinking you can only do your best work in certain conditions, requiring specific tools to do the work, abandoning a project as soon as it gets difficult. All that stuff is like pretty like, oh, dang it, that's me.
I know. So it's worth it to read the book just for this one page, maybe.
Kristen, we should figure out what tier it is.
I would say now that I've read it the second time, I do think it is worth a read, so I will give it a C.
1C from Kristen, 1C from Cameron, because I would recommend it to other people. I'd probably let them borrow it. I wouldn't tell people to buy it. Chat, let us know. We'll tally the comments afterwards. Let us know if this deserves the vaunted triple C tier rating.
Well, I feel like I will recommend it with an asterisk. Like if
Yep.
someone is stuck in their work, I wouldn't be like, here, read this Rick Rubin book. Like that's gonna get them even more confused, I think.
Yeah.
But I feel like if you are already like an artist type and you want to articulate what you're doing, then I'm like, okay, yeah, this book, might give you the words.
Yeah, it's a legibility finder book, much
Yeah.
more so than a help book. I feel like it would do really, really well as like a desk calendar. Reading it back to back to back, you're just kind of like, all right, dude, I get it. All right, Kristen, how are you gonna find creative source today?
My weakness or challenge is finishing. I never feel like, oh yes, I need to find more sources of inspiration. I'm like, oh my gosh, the drawer is overflowing. I
Yeah.
need to actually just like do a thing and finish it.
My cuppeth overflow.
Yeah, I feel very
cup
lucky in that
overfloweth.
regard. And I think we all also tend to be friends with people who are overflowing with ideas, so that's never an issue. It's always about focusing. Is there a reading assignment for next week?
The answer is yes.
I have a book in mind, actually, that Cameron sent to me that we could possibly do.
There's a book. Let's just call it.
Okay, let's just call it. How about this one?
Ooh, that's a good one.
Yeah.
How Buildings Learn by
Stuart Brand, who wrote the Whole Earth catalog as well, which
Stuart Brand.
someone in the chat might be a fan.
That'll be a good book. I already read it, so that's great. We'll drop a link to it if you want to buy it. It's kind of expensive.
It is kind of expensive,
but
but I can see why, because it's one of these like really weird format.
Yeah, and it's very pretty. Discord is the best bad solution we have for getting people together.
And then we'll also drop esoteric internet finds.
Y'all have no idea how many weirdo links I look at on a daily basis. Y'all gonna learn today.